Hello, Peter.
Hey, Kevin, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm really happy to have you on the show. We discussed a bit last week about some topics that I found it really interesting. And so for the audience, I would like you to present yourself and maybe introduce the first topic, which is a kind of, it feels like light, but it's a heavy one, I think.
All right. Okay. So hello, everyone, and hello, Kevin. My name is Peter Horvath. I am based in Geneva, Switzerland, and I am a digital strategy, user experience, and service design consultant. I am working under the moniker holistique.design. I come from this weird background that I'm not really officially a designer, if you can say that, because I'm originally an economist. And I also did an MBA here in Switzerland at EPFL. But I've been working in human-centered roles and in user experience and service design for a number of years. And so for me, these two things come together, where I see really that some designers look at me sometimes a bit strangely, and then economists look at me, or business people look at me a bit strangely as well. But rather, I'd say that so far it's been a positive strange, not a negative strange.
Thank you very much. It's interesting that you started your presentation with the fact that you are not a designer, because the one topic we will discuss now is the definition of design. Or, well, you had a nice way to put it. One of the great strengths of design is that we don't have a single definition.
Yeah, so the reason that I brought that is, so I'll be teaching human-centered design at Lucerne University starting this September. And sort of in preparation, of course, I'm pulling together a lot of things. And this is something that was always sort of in my head because of two reasons. On one, that it's pretty good. I mean, it shows this design review on, okay, like, why do you need to label it? Like, it's design and this is what it does. But the other reason is that it is a wrongly used quote. So this is from Richard Buchanan. And yeah, it says, one of the great strengths of design is that we have not settled on a single definition. And then the rest of the quote actually goes on into why that is a good thing. Why disciplines which have a clear definition become stagnant. And he goes on to explain that definitions are not really there to give a final word, but rather to start a discussion and help a group actually start working to find their own scope. And I really like that approach. And, the important thing is that Buchanan then goes on in that same text and actually gives a definition to design. So whereas most people use it like Richard Buchanan said, it's not important, but then he does give a quote. A definition. And that definition is, design is the human power of conceiving, planning, and making products that serve human beings in the accomplishment of their individual and collective purposes. I had to read that out. I didn't know that by heart. And I hate this quote. The reason that I hate it is because I thought I came up with the part that serving humans is part of design. And then here's this super smart guy who said it decades ago. So I'm a bit disappointed that I'm not that smart. But at least, it seems I'm not the only one thinking it like this. And so he says, what I pull out from this is it's conceiving, planning, making, and to serve. So to me, that's really sort of the package that, very often for designers, or a lot of designers, specifically who are more closer to art or to graphic design, or different styles of design, really the creativity is a central motive. And here it's only one of them. It's this conceiving, and then making a plan on how to actually do it. Very often that is the definition of design. It's a blueprint to actually do something. But then what I also like, and this is the Merriam-Webster definition as well, is that the creation of that thing that you conceive is as much part of design as just thinking of it. So the making is equally important. And all this with the idea, to serve human beings. So human-centered design is already, part of design. And that's, that it serves this either individual or collective purposes. And what we were discussing earlier with you, Kevin, was this this notion of design really goes from, okay, there's a designer or a small group of designers, and then they conceive, plan, and make something for the people.
Yeah.
And what if we turn this around and looked at the collective whose purposes we are trying to fulfill or accomplish with design? What if they were part of the design, which is, of course, a big part in service design, but also in all types of design when it comes to co-creation. And then really, okay, looking at co-creation and how far can it be taken. And that's the topic that I also wrote my MBA thesis on, looking at, okay, co-creation in more detail. And the interesting thing is that co-creation has a lot of sort of different types of explanations. It has a lot of synonyms, and very often it's used in different ways. There's a big school of co-creation which looks at, okay, co-creation is internally cooperating within departments, and I think that is hugely important. And then there's another part which is co-creating or working together with the constituents, the outside constituents of the organization, primarily the customers. Yeah. And my thesis focused specifically on this part. I was connecting the topics of service design and Switzerland. And what I looked at is, how can we use Switzerland's direct democracy system as a case study for an extreme form of co-creation? And how can the 170 years of experience be used of Switzerland's direct democracy be used in organizations today? What is there to learn? What is there to forget? And so that's this dimensions of co-creation and then Switzerland's direct democracy are the two topics that came together there. And in my research, again, I'm not really an academic guy, but then I also, okay, so co-creation, what's the definition of that? And that again is something that doesn't really specifically have a definition. And multiple sort of papers on co-creation argue that one of the problems is that it hasn't been really properly defined. And there are, but very recently have there been additions to the research that, went into defining co-creation. And I always think that, tools and sort of methods are useful to be able to map yourself and be able to share a vision within the group that you are working in. And then co-creation is like this as well, that it's not a thing. And pulling together from multiple sources, I came up with this co-creation matrix, which basically looks at two dimensions. One is, and both of these do not come from me, I just put them together. One of them, which looks at the service process stages, and it looks at everything from co-ideation all the way to co-consumption. And then there are 6 or 7 steps in between: co-validation, co-design, co-test, co-launch, co-production, and then in the end, co-consumption. And then this shows that, when I say co-creation, it can mean various things. It can mean that I cooperate with others in the very beginning of the process or in various stages of the process, which of course, it makes sense. But, putting it into these different categories shows you that when you say you do co-creation, does it go across the board, or do you pick a specific area? And then the other dimension is the customer involvement, and whether that customer involvement is really passive, which is, for example, big data analytics, where there's co-creation because your input is being used, but you don't even know about it. Or is it reactive, where the audience is being asked to give their opinion? Workshops are like this, and surveys, and various tools that many companies now use. But give us your opinion on what we should do next, and then we'll do. But then there's a higher level to it, which I call integrated co-creation, which is where the direction of the request for co-creation, it can be bidimensional, or bidirectional, meaning that it can be the customers or the constituents themselves who say or go to the organization and say, hey, here's what I want to happen. But it's really the organization who needs to create the space for that to be there, and really to help the audiences, its audiences, to have the mindset that, hey, you can say things.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of literature that goes back, a couple of decades, that say that because of various things within today's economy, and when I say today's economy, it goes back potentially 10 to 20 years, it's clear that co-creation and working together with your audiences is becoming more and more important. And that it's really the services or products that really embrace the input from their constituents that will go on and function well. But some of these sort of books or descriptions actually mention that this will not happen overnight. Some say that it will take 50 years until really the highest level of this collaboration between customers and organizations will happen. Potentially, probably because of both, because it takes a while for audiences to grasp, or accept the power that they have, and it takes a while for organizations to accept the power that they're giving up, and then to really do that. And so from these two dimensions comes up a matrix. Okay, and there, if someone in an organization said, we want to work together with our customers, okay, where? And then and where not?
Yeah.
And you can start mapping, okay, we do this here, we do this there. And Swiss direct democracy is really good. For those who don't know what Swiss direct democracy is, it's basically a system where the citizens of Switzerland have the first and final say in what the country does. The way they do that is through a relatively complex system that can be simplified into, there are initiatives that that anyone within Switzerland, any citizen, can start in order to change Switzerland's constitution. And then there are challenges which anyone can start to question a law that the parliament has put in place. And so that's why it's a first and final say that the people have.
Yeah.
And really, there are more voting going on in Switzerland than literally the entire rest of the world, because that happens regularly. And there will be one coming up in September as well, which will be quite big.
Exactly.
And this is then the question of, okay, Swiss, the way that I sort of defined, again, oh my God, I sound really academic with all these definitions, but the way that I'll put it that way, simplified then what Swiss direct democracy is a predefined, transparent, and binding process to implement proactive and reactive citizen input, making citizens a fourth branch of power in Switzerland. And predefined because it's a system, and it's not something that was put in place and then left there. It did evolve, through the first several decades. It's transparent because people know how it works, and it's laid out, and what happens. Sort of, if this, then that. There's a stream of that. And it's binding because what citizens say happens or should happen. There's a few exceptions.
It's not always the case. Yeah.
No, there's a few exceptions to the rule, but I think that also point out, because here's the thing, I'm not saying that Swiss direct democracy is the model to be adapted, but rather let's look at it as a case study and what can we learn from it. So I think that the shortcomings are actually a great thing, because we can say, oh, that's not perfect, we can improve on that, and we should. So far it's been a monologue. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So it was really interesting. I didn't want to interrupt you because I felt like it was a totally linked thought process. So it was important for you to go through until at least the end of the explanation. But no, I want to come back maybe some steps earlier in your explanations, because we went through a definition of design, then the fact you developed the fact that currently the main paradigm in design is that there are designers who create stuff, and the decision process and creativity process and everything is rely upon a single person, basically, to say, okay, if we switch the table and talk about instead of inside out process and outside in process, basically. But before we go on the outside in process, maybe we have to say that this padding is one which is present, basically, which exists in relationship with other paradigms that are in our society. Basically, all the products and services paradigms are, rely on the fact that you have expertise inside organizations, and those expertise, which are most of the time people who own this expertise, we need them to make things happen. Yep. And it's a way of organizing work that is mainly imputable to the way management works in general. So we want to split things into manageable stuff, and the way to do it is to put create domain of expertise. So we can draw back to the definition of design, which is not well defined, as the quality of it, and it's it's a strength and as well a weakness compared to maybe other fields where things are really clearly defined.
Yep. I mean, the thing is that almost everyone uses the word design. Scientists use it.
Yeah.
Engineers use it. Fashion industry uses it, and they all use it in a different way, and it makes design into a fourami, where it's really that you think you know what the other side is talking about, but in reality you don't, because you are hearing, or you hear a word, but you are following it in the way that you think of it.
Yes.
And Buchanan does point out that because this definition that he gives is that it basically means that anything that humanity or people create is actually design. But then the question is, okay, does one person create it, or does the community create it?
Mm-hmm.
And there was one point that I wanted to jump on. But yeah, that's the expertise.
Yes.
So there's, for example, Firefox, the foundation, the browser, and Firefox has done a tremendous amount of co-creation with its huge developer base. Basically, they have hundreds thousands of developers who are contributing to their code base, and they basically are seen as employees. There is an evolution of the involvement of customers, which states that, and it's very funny, there's a quote that at the beginning, in the early 20th century, within the production process, customers were seen as an interference.
Mm-hmm.
And that evolved into them being seen as temporary contributors, and then that being that transforming them into being seen as strategic resources. Mm-hmm. And basically what I'm proposing here is that, okay, let's take this trend. So it started with interference, it's then temporary contributors, a strategic resource. If we connect these dots and then continue further, then it means that they could become, internal decision makers. Mm-hmm. So it's just sort of future costing a bit on, okay, looking at where this came from and where it's heading.
Yeah.
But you are right.
It follow another trend is, we are speaking more about decentralization of power. I mean, I see the entire thing related to our discussion. It's like you cannot see these trends without making the connection with what we are talking now about. It's like co-creation, decentralization, how we organize stuff in a world where you cannot say this one guy is responsible of, you cannot say, in co-creation, you cannot say I'm the owner of something.
Well, you can be the owner of, let's say, or the guide of the process, but yeah, you're right. Which of course does introduce an okay, then who's responsible?
Exactly.
I'd like to ask you. So you mentioned decentralization. So where do you see this decentralization happening?
That's a good question. Well, the fact that the technology now allows us to think differently on some models we had in society, and basically the fact that we centralize stuff because it was easier in terms of physical space to do it. You have one place where people can go physically speaking, so we start put things here because it's practical. It's useful to have stuff in the same place where everyone goes through the same place. So I guess centralization is a byproduct of organizing physical space. And it makes sense in this way that currently a lot of countries rely on systems that have a centralization core of decisions, of everything. And if it's decentralized from the real core, it's close to another attractor, like big attractors. You have big points of convergence of power, of decisions, stuff like that. Because of physical space. Well, at least there's some link with this. And I see technology as changed those paradigms, where we can create paradigms where everyone has a part of the decision and have a part of the trust and everything, because basically you don't have to be physically somewhere to participate into something. Well, maybe is the link here. I'm really simplifying it.
No, it's good. Though I'm just having the ideas, and I like that you wrote down some thoughts, so I did the same. So I'll pick up on this last one first, which is this sort of space and then the digital space. So again, within Switzerland, there's this idea of sort of proximity of decision should equal proximity to effect, meaning that if there's something that affects a one small community, then they are the ones who should be making the decision on it. And if the decision affects the entire nation, then it should be made by the entire nation. And so from this rhymes with your decentralization thought, and this has been in place in Switzerland for a long time, that okay, if it's a small, it's like the anti-micromanagement, right? Like the Swiss government doesn't want to meddle in the doings of either the cantons or the communities. It's again, for those who are not familiar with it, it's worth pointing out that the way that I heard it told, or that I've been told multiple times, is Swiss people exist outside of Switzerland because within Switzerland, they are in their minds more related or more connected to the canton that they live in, which there are, I think, 26, or even to the community which they live in. And so these decision-making processes exist on all these three levels.
It's kind of contradictory or paradoxal feeling when you live in Switzerland, is that you feel a strong power of local decisions and power structures, and you feel as well a strong power above them, but they are not interfering at the same level of decisions. So it's never like a clash between canton and federal institutions. You cannot feel this, and I think you can never see something like that because of this separation of.
But I just wanted to point out this proximity because you mentioned that because of the digital space. Well, Switzerland didn't do this because of this of the digital space. But many authors who were writing about co-creation actually point out digital and this decentralization as an contributor to more power going to people. But I think that Switzerland's case shows very well that yes, it can be a factor, but it doesn't it's not necessary. It can exist without that as well. This level of decision making is not bound to only having this digital capabilities.
Yeah.
And I wanted to go back to the sort of the capability of a designer and to the Firefox example, because yes, Firefox does a lot of co-creation, but they do it with experts. I'm sure that they do a lot of other sort of co-creation efforts as well. But the point is that this really open culture that they have there is really focused on those individuals who have the capability to actually do what they want to see done. And then the real question is, okay, how far do you open this up? Do you open this up to people who do, want to see something but may not actually have the capability to do it? And this then brings up, okay, how much is the ability to be able to imagine the right thing? How often is it coupled with the ability to actually execute that thing? And then it comes to this conceiving and making within design. Do those always need to be linked, or is that sort of a teamwork where this happens? But craft in design, the actual ability to create, is very often looked upon very much, so much so that in many cases it overshadows the fact that yes, you have the ability to make, but is your ability to imagine equally strong, or your ability to plan?
Well, but don't think that the fact that we are looking the craft and putting that as the gold faculty of someone like a designer is the fact that we remove from him some part of the decision. Like, before human-centric design, pretty much all the process was internally, like at the person level. He has to see the world, interpret it inside himself, and take decision of what could be a better design or a better solution, and then put it out of the world into the world and say, does it work or not? Now we are saying, no, that's not you who decides what people want, needs, or you have to talk to people to understand them. I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking the
No,
story.
no. I think what you're saying is right, but there's an important piece there, and that goes. I'm really happy that I wrote down control as the final thing, because you mentioned is sort of this losing control, and I think that yes, this goes back this decentralization, which is very close to, or can be close to, losing control. It doesn't necessarily need to be, because you can still have control by decentralizing, but then always knowing and saying who can do what. But one sort of dimension of it can be you decentralize to the level where you lose the control.
Yes.
But it's important to keep some level of control, and that goes back to the strategy, to branding, or whatever you want to call it, to have these guiding lights that guide you to make sure that what people propose are in line with actually where you want to go. So I think that, again, when you let other people decide, there should be some boundary. Now, that boundary can be internal to the people who are making these decisions, and I think that's really the case in Switzerland. Switzerland does have, a constitution which can be looked at as its strategy, but really, Swiss people have really internalized their Swissness, and very often, actually, Swiss people make decisions in votes that go against, so to say, their best personal interest, because they can think in the level of community, and they often do. They say, yeah, that would be better for me because maybe it was, I think, recently a vote on getting rid of the TV and radio tax, but it didn't go through. So people actually said, hey, I want to continue paying that tax.
Yeah.
Because I know that it contributes to me being able to watch Swiss TV in 3 or 4 languages.
Yes.
And I know that is needed, so I am willing to continue paying it. So there is a need, and no wonder authors, envision that this can take 20, 30, 40, 50 years until this co-creation, can be achieved at its highest level, because the people themselves need to get to that stage where, okay, we are at a level where we can make decisions that are good that serve the greater good instead of just my best interest. And I'd actually challenge you a bit on this decentralization, because if we're talking about Swiss direct democracy, then we can talk about democracy, and then we can talk about politics, which I do not want to do because I'm not an expert on it at all. I was really looking at Swiss direct democracy more or only from a process perspective.
Of course.
But there are a lot of things in the world which go in the direction of actually, especially in politics, decentralization. And funnily enough, when you look at, okay, why should we follow a Swiss system? What are the KPIs of a Swiss system? Where it can be, for example, trust in government. Because if we look at trust in government within Switzerland, and we want to translate the Swiss system into an organizational management model, then we can say that trust in government equals loyalty to the brand. And actually, the Swiss
trust a lot
one of
institutions.
Yes, they trust their institutions, and more importantly, whereas this figure is deteriorating in many areas in many places in the world, in Switzerland is actually getting stronger, at least based on the last reviews that I saw. So it does seem that it can work. At the same time, and maybe we can leave then the Swiss direct democracy topic behind us. Even a lot of sort of political theorists or politologists say that Switzerland shouldn't exist. This system that it has just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, against all odds, it appears to resist. That's true.
Defies reality.
Yes. Well, I think it's the kind of exceptions to the rule. It's
and as we know in design, outliers are important to look at.
Yeah,
what's happening there.
One should not take a single specific case and make it. You cannot draw causality where it's merely correlation of something. It's hard to especially in Switzerland, where you have a lot of factors. Like, it's a small country. You have a lot of different languages, cultures. In the middle of it's like it's incredible the diversity you can find, and at the same time people are so without speaking of political stuff, people are so proud of their country. Like, it was one country, but when you dig in the country, you realize that people are more proud of the region and the canton and etc., and a specific subset of cultures that you can find within Switzerland. And the fact that it's, if I go back to control, as you mentioned, I feel it's a really, really interesting topic, because you can, if you use a framework like Kinefin from Dave Snowden, with the different domains of complexity and the constraints that you can find in those domains, you can see that most of the governments in the world works on what is the name of it, is the governing constraints, or even sometimes the fixed constraints. So it's the kind of space where things can work on based on best practices, because everything is known and knowable. So there's few uncertainty in those environments. But then they apply their logic, and you can find that reality hits hard on it. No, there's a lot of uncertainty. And where Swiss is maybe good is that they have a mix of governing constraints and enabling constraints. So they are loose in the control they give, they have on, the population and how they can organize themselves. Because you can see it at many levels. You can see that a specific subset of a region can organize in a totally different way than a layer on the top, etc., etc. And this allows diversity. And maybe this is one key of, but maybe we are losing the context of the discussion.
For those who don't know the Cinefin framework, do look it up.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid. It's pretty daunting at the beginning, but then it starts making sense. But the whole idea of it is that it's there are 4 different kinds of problems, depending on how much is known and how complex they are and how many solutions there are to them. And it's very important to know what kind of problem you are solving, because each of them have different tools that they could and should be solved with. And one of the big problems is that we very often apply tools to a problem which does not fit it, and then expect it to work, and then it doesn't. And it's spelled CYNIFIM, I
Yes,
think. Yeah.
that's it.
So it's and yeah. So on control. A shout out.
Co-creation. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a big point. Co-creation is a loss in control from a classical management perspective.
It's definitely, but again, this is a great quote from a strategy book. I don't remember which one, but I remember the quote that it's doing strategy or managing a business without your customers is like dancing with a rag doll. That it's like it's kind of like doing your job, but actually it's not really.
Yeah.
And then there's this other notion around strategy that nowadays strategy is much more like there are some, I think it was the people at Leap, which is a great agency here in Switzerland, who say that instead of map, think of things as a compass, or think of strategy as a compass. So it doesn't lay out things exactly, but it helps you navigate. Yeah. And then again, in some strategy books, there's this quote that nowadays strategy is becoming more and more like navigating in a fog. You actually don't know where you're going, and so control is really just the illusion of control. Yes. And there's Mark Fontaine, who does the Service Design Show, a great show to check out. And he recently sort of had this question starter of whether service design functions better when it is done on a project basis with a fixed outcome or fixed budget or fixed timing, or it's better to be doing service design internally in an organization, where you're better able to then adjust to the findings continuously instead of needing to deliver something specific within a time frame. And my thought on that is, but that's not new, because that's where the whole Agile Manifesto comes from. And looking at that, I like the fact that software developers realized that they only have an illusion of control through processes, through tools, through comprehensive documentation. I'm reading from the Agile Manifesto here, from contract negotiations, from plans. And instead of focusing on those things, they decided to focus on other things, to focus on the individuals, on interaction, working software instead of just the documentation, customer collaboration instead of contract negotiation, and then responding to change instead of following the plan, which again goes back to this compass, goes back to navigating in the fog. And again, a quote that was in a talk, and then I'll let you, which is the thought that you have control in software development doesn't really exist, because software development projects, especially big projects, start out like with a family of 5 wanting to travel from the US to Australia. And they fly there, but actually they arrive 2 weeks later. It costs twice as much, and little Johnny gets lost along the way, and they actually land in India. So I like that example, because it makes it into a tangible example of what really happens in many software projects. That like it's hard to think about it in that level, but when you think about a family travel, the scope got reduced, and then it took much longer, and like there are things that happen that you didn't mean to. But again, like you need to focus rather on the individuals and interaction, on collaboration, versus really the documentation and setting things in stone.
Clearly I see the link with agile development and stuff like that. So but Yeah. So I have a question for you. We talked about decentralization. We talked about organizing stuff in a different way. We didn't really talk about co-creation itself, like how it works to do it. But we understand that we need people that are not inside our boundaries of work, you know, the world of work we are living in every day, like doing this type of activities and etc., to come in, put another perspective on some stuff, give, you know, some knowledge and etc., and take part of something, but without being really, you know, totally part of it. And this should happen in organizations that are not working this way most of the time.
Yeah.
And so now you see the link between the two, because for most people will say, well, why are they talking about agile and decentralization? We are talking about, you know, co-creation. But co-creation, you know, is maybe a way to hack a system to, you know, change the way it is organized.
Yep.
Maybe. I don't know. I drop it like this.
You touched on a good topic, and I like this. I mean, one of the arguments that's often being made around UX design's research phase on why it's really important, even for companies who deliver products for people like them. It's because they see it internally, whereas their customers, even if they are people like them with the same problems, they don't see it internally.
Mm-hmm.
And to that, another sort of little quote from someone who was commenting on an NPS, a Net Promoter Score question, which asks you, how likely are you to recommend Microsoft Office on to a friend or colleague on a scale of 0 to 10? And the comment was, dear Microsoft, you need to understand that we do not talk about Microsoft with our friends and colleagues about how much we would recommend it to them. So sometimes even the question, not even the answer, but sometimes even the question thinks that there is more commitment to a product or service from the customer side than there actually is. So yeah, this control and then getting an outside view, we get logged in. And I think, like, you know, you see that everywhere. When you work with experts who've been working in a specific domain or a specific industry for a long time, they very often don't think of solutions outside, and they very often say that, well, yeah, but that wouldn't work here.
Mm-hmm.
And again, in design, very often one of the recommendations is to look outside, look at other industries, look at other domains. How have similar things been solved there? Bring that in, so you know, maybe it's usable. And that's sort of one of the cornerstones of creativity, is combining two things that have previously been not combined.
Yeah. So should we redefine design?
Oh God, no.
Should we?
There's been enough said about the definition.
Or should we find another word to say what we are doing?
The way that I always try to define what I do, which I especially when in not a work context, I fail as often as I succeed, is I try to connect it to something that other people are familiar with. Yeah. So if someone asks, so what is service design, and he or she works in construction or in just real estate, then I would say, you know, well, it's the connection of how, you know, the flat is laid out and how usable are the doors or what the flow is within the kitchen. So that's something that they can relate to. And I think that, and this goes back to the right part or the correct part of Buchanan's wrongly quoted part, that one of the strengths is that there's no one definition, is that by actually giving a definition, you can start an argument and you can tweak it to fit the purpose, so that the whoever you're talking with can more easily relate to it and understand it.
I agree. I agree with you. But then you have we live in a tension then between the fact that we like the fact that it is not well defined, and at the same time we want it to be a community of practice that is coherent and not
But it's
necessarily
not coherent.
homogeneous, but coherent. Like we have a common goal. I don't feel it is the case, and I recently started some kind of I tried to start a community, but not about design, but about something in between different practices. Because the more you do design, and you do design at different levels, because we are talking a lot about products and services, but in the length, through the lens of technology, and the problem with that is usually the fact that we expect some kind of neatly defined product with an interface and stuff like that. But design is much more than that. It can be designing an organization. Where is the interface? Well, it's the processes, the rules, and stuff like that. So it's not necessarily something tangible as my table here or the computer by which we are looking at each other. It's many things, and so because of that, there are several domain of practices and community of practices that exist that uses different languages but are doing similar stuff than us, basically. And so we have knowledge everywhere, and we expect us to be in the middle of it because we think about us as a community, as something coherent and a group of people sharing the same kind of perspectives and knowledge, and it is not the case. And I don't know if it's a real problem. I don't know if it's a problem at all. But it's a weird constatation, from a community that feels like it is coherent.
I honestly don't think it is coherent, and it's not a problem. I think that it's not coherent because almost all individuals, have a different, in any space, have different capabilities, different levels of profession in various types. The real important thing is that the team that's set up or the group that's set up is complementary, and then maybe the individuals are not the same, but then the groups can function in a similar way. But we are doing an article series on business and design and the relationship between the two and the meeting point for a business audience. And we've been talking with some design leaders from Swiss organizations, and it really, even if you'd say that it's not the reason that I'm saying that it's not a coherent group is because every organization is different, and every organization accepts the role of design, even something as well defined as user experience design. They see its importance in different ways, and it will be differently important. I know organizations that have 0 UX designers, and it shows. But I also heard of organizations where there was a UX designer who came in, I think, in year 5, and he said that, things are pretty decent. Like there's been research done, the interface looks okay, it's usable, they're talking to users, they have some system. So it's not that he had to create the entire system, because there was a set of group of developers who, almost fully, if not fully, fulfilled that role. But in some organizations it won't work. So it always will depend on it. I wouldn't say that it's coherent, but I don't think any profession is. What's a bit difficult maybe is that very often, and designers are not helping the cause here in some cases, that we want to position ourselves as, we are the people who can determine and define what needs to be built, working with others, really imagine it on a high level, then also go into planning it, and then creating it as well. So that's when if you think of a building, then we'll define whether it should be a stadium or just a pitch or for what sport it should be. And then we do the drawings, and then we actually start building. And different people that designers work with will demand different elements of that from the designers. And then the question is really, okay, then that goes out to all the designers on here. Then what don't we do? Like, what is the part that we admit? Okay, so with all this collaboration that is supposed to be, the central word on our flag, what are the things that we admit
we won't do
that we won't do, where the collaboration where we become helping, or where we become not the central point, but actually just aiding others. And if you say, well, that's accounting and finance, that's a bit of a roller. Okay, so you define what is done, how is done, who is it done for, what it's like, and how it's executed, but you don't want to have to do anything with the finance part of it. So we do have to live up to the fact that, okay, like, if we say that we do everything, we'll need to emphasize with the fact that there are professions out there in the world that have existed for as long as sort of ours, and they exist for a reason as well.
Yeah, I agree. But part of it, and maybe we can close the discussion, this discussion on this, and this is a theme that is a big one, I think, this year, because there's a lot of discussion around the future of design education in academic settings and stuff like that. I think that most of the paradigms, and the fact that also people coming from design schools think of design as a coherent thing, is because of design schools themselves. I mean, we learn from there a set of paradigms that are here, and we perpetuate them, and we think it is true for every other people who title themselves designers. I know a lot of designers, maybe as much as you, like, that are not coming from a background, a precise background of design, where they did this school and this one, and their first job was junior designer in some startup, or I don't know what. I know plenty of people are coming doing design today that are coming from various backgrounds, and these people don't think like that, as you mentioned.
Yeah, let's take it up from there around education, because I want to approach this from a positive perspective. Instead of thinking of what are the negative things that a design school teaches, I want to instead look at, okay, what is taught about design in other disciplines in schools.
Okay, so it could be a discussion study on this topic.
Yeah,
I think true. Although I just want to precise that it was not a negative description. It is a criticism I give to design education, to make it probably better on some characteristics that I find is sometimes a bit reductive on some topics. But well, we can have this discussion another time. Thanks a lot, Peter, for this discussion. It was really, really interesting. We cover a lot of ground from design definition.
Well, you said it should be a chat and a discussion, so we made it that.
I'm just looking back to the discussion, I just think it was amazing. So thank you.
My pleasure, Kevin. Thank you very much.
Bye.